SYS presents Adventures in Online Education.
Welcome, friends. You're listening to SYS Presents Adventures in Online Education. I'm your host, Natalie Conway. Thanks for being here. Do you know about the AOE newsletter? Head over to aoepodcast.org and enter your info at the bottom of the page to get a weekly update from me. It's a little piece of positivity for your inbox. Also, have you heard our new podcast? Check out This Day in Education. It's a daily podcast about important people, events, and inventions that have shaped education in the U.S. It's short and sweet and will hopefully inspire you every day. This Day in Education. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or at thisdayined.org. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Hazel Wheeler, a fantastic mom and supporter of online education. I had the pleasure of teaching her son during my first year at Frontier Charter Academy and have had the joy of seeing her student grow and blossom in online school. You're going to love getting to know Hazel and her perspective on virtual schooling. So, you ready? Let's learn something new. Hazel, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today and talking with me. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, it's just a joy to be able to talk about school stuff, education. These are things that I find really important.
Me as well. We've enjoyed talking about education in the past, and so I'm glad to get to speak with you again today. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you're into?
Well, I am a middle-aged stay-at-home housewife who happens to also have an online learner at home. I've spent about 20 years working in early childhood education, both as a preschool teacher and as a nanny, and I'm always very curious about the education and development. I love gardening, cooking, and writing, and keep a blog primarily centered around those activities.
That's awesome. We'll have a link to the blog in our show notes so that listeners can get to read and hear more of your ideas on education and life as well. The first question I have for you, so many people choose online schooling every year, but they all have unique reasons for why they do so. Why did you choose online schooling for your child, and what's made you stay online?
Well, our journey toward online school was pretty gradual. Before our son had started kindergarten, we knew he had some vision issues. And over time, by second grade, he had been diagnosed with a learning disability and some other challenges. Unfortunately, the IEP and 504 recommendations from his doctors and therapists were often kind of skirted around by the teachers because they were concerned that him using adaptive tools in the classroom would make him appear different. So his need for more support kind of fell by the wayside. And I understand when you have 26 kids in a small classroom, the teacher is basically triaging in real time where their efforts need to be focused. This is a really clear example of a kid who has plenty of resources outside the school still slipping through the cracks. And I think that the stresses from the distracting classroom environment, being bullied for some of his disabilities, it just really left him pretty emotionally and physically exhausted at the end of the day. He has memory issues, so he wasn't remembering any of the instruction, plus the fact that he was stressed. And so we were seeing his self-esteem and his emotional health really taking a hard turn. And I did notice that while he wasn't finishing in-class projects, when he was assigned projects to be completed at home, he could do this because I was there to provide one-on-one support. That was really encouraging to me because I knew that I could help him. Before spring break of third grade, we decided to bring him home. And I figured we could get him caught up in a year or so. And that was true. We both loved homeschooling. I was able to create an interest-led curriculum of learning experiences, which is perfect for a kid who has the kind of challenges he has. I was able to create a lot of content and activities, and we were really studying in relevant, engaging topics. We keep Mason bees, and so we use science and math as part of that study. We learned about the history and technologies of the first Americans. We played math games. We practiced writing through creating comics, which was something that was perfect to break the writing down into small pieces. I totally loved homeschooling, and I know that we had a fabulous time with it. At the end of the summer after fourth grade, I saw an ad for Frontier Charter Academy of Oregon on a homeschool parent Facebook page, and it just clicked for me because the school offered an inquiry-based curriculum, one in which information and skills were presented in ways that were immediately relevant. Because we know that when students experience learning through projects that offer them some self-direction, their level of personal investment deepens.
Absolutely. And your homeschooling journey is really fascinating. And I am so appreciative that you were able to do everything you did for your son and that you were able to catch him up so quickly and also engage him so deeply, because when he came to me in fifth grade, he was so excited for learning, and that was really apparent. And that's what matters. That's what you need first and foremost, is that excitement. And it was easier then for he and I to develop a relationship and connect a little bit because he was okay being there. There are a variety of online schools and their programs differ rather significantly. It's great that you found a school that fit with your values and was able to meet your son's needs in positive ways. I think it's really important that parents get to know the school's mission and understand how it works before fully enrolling. It's got to be a good fit. So you've stayed with FCA. Your son must have experienced success for you to do so. Can you tell us about the changes you saw in him?
When we started, he was really needing a lot of side-by-side support. So that first year that you taught him, I was there for every single class and really to help him through the day. And now he's become fairly independent. He has a lot more confidence in his abilities. He will go off to his room and work up on his loft bed. There's really no distractions up there. So that's his favorite place to work. And he'll, pop in and out of class and mostly manage his day on his own. And it's been really good. He has more time to spend on his own personal pursuits. I love that with online school, he has a chance to really focus on mastery and, check in with the teachers for feedback on projects, get their guidance, and try again. I think that is really, really critical to kids being able to feel that they've accomplished something, is giving them the choice to work through it until they're satisfied with it. I also like the fact that our son has consistently been invited to his IEP meetings and 504 meetings.
Yeah.
And I think that the online environment really provides more privacy for kids who are facing learning disabilities and challenges. Because there are assistive technologies kind of built in, it's very subtle. So their peers don't really know what's going on with their learning unless they know. Voice to text and other adaptive technologies are available, including having options for stories or information to be presented verbally if needed. So thanks to this support, we've seen profound improvements in our son. He's happy, he likes learning, he sees himself as a competent learner. Last year, it was determined that he didn't need an IEP plan anymore, and that was a big surprise for us.
Woohoo! Congratulations! I always half joke that my job as a special education teacher is to make it so that I don't have a job, i.e. helping students get to a point where they no longer need special ed services because we've worked with them, we've filled in knowledge gaps, they've gained necessary life skills, and they're confident and they're competent in their academics and their abilities in general. And they know how to self-advocate. They know how to navigate school. Oh, that's so wonderful. I'm so happy for him and for you. It is a tremendous feeling when a child no longer needs your support in those specific ways. They're soaring. They're soaring on their own power. That's awesome. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the tensions between being mom and being a school support at home. SYS is an online management company that takes a different approach. We partner with schools to manage solutions. Whether you are a district adding an online option for students or an online school looking to go in a new direction, SYS Education can help make it exactly what you need it to be, with high-quality products at a fraction of the cost that schools pay to other companies. We are not just an educational consulting company, we are online educators ourselves and a tech team like no other. Let us help you bring your online school experience to the next level. Find out more at syseducation.org or by emailing info@syseducation.org. Set up your free consultation meeting to discuss how SYS might be able to help your school. Welcome back. I'm talking to Hazel Wheeler about the joys and trials and tribulations of online schooling and being a mom of an online student. I imagine there being some inherent tension in being a mom and learning support at home. What's the hardest part about being the parent of an online student, and how do you make that work?
For me, the most difficult part of being a mom and supporting our son's learning was knowing how much support he needs and how much he can do on his own. As I said, I spent the entirety of his first year online next to him because he needed that. And now he's able to really work independently. Being able to provide the continuity of one-on-one support was essential during the transition. And I think it's something not just for fifth grade, but really for many kids of all ages going into online school.
Absolutely. Yeah. Having that transition time, that support, that extra support at home as you get used to all the systems and everything that's there.
Exactly. I mean, it was definitely a learning curve for me. So why wouldn't it be for him? And as a parent, it took a lot of active listening on my part to know like when to take a step back and start redirecting him to the teachers as he was getting older and kind of taking incremental steps towards supporting his independence. It's really a balancing act. I think that the best way I can support our son is to base my expectations on his demonstrated levels of responsibility and independence.
And that's a really wise idea. And teachers can take the same approach if they're really good at observing and if they work closely with families. Can you give us an example of how you used what you knew about your son's levels of independence and responsibility to manage expectations around school?
Yes. One example would be in seventh grade, we moved from me checking in on his work twice or more a week to once a week. And then some weeks when he was doing really well independently, I didn't check at all. And that will change over time.
Mm-hmm.
I like to give kids opportunities to learn how to structure and take more control of their day. I think it's critical to their development. And it's also critical experiencing those consequences of the choices that they make. The risks are relatively small and can be learned from, so long as we offer support when they ask. While I expect him to get his homework done in a timely manner, I try not to impose my own goals on his learning. Instead, I like to help him figure out what his goals are, mostly by encouraging a growth mindset and asking helpful questions when he's stuck. Things like, what do you need to know in order to do X? Or what do you want to better understand about this? When I give him a chance to articulate what he needs, this will help him refocus his attention and point him in the desired direction.
Yes, that is such good teaching. This is such great practice. Hazel, your teaching background certainly came in handy and continues to, I'm sure. or you're just a really, really good mom, maybe both. Asking the child what they need, what they think might help them. We adults want to just jump in sometimes and fix or suggest. One of my previous guests, Natalie Varabasso, said, kids have all the answers. And I think you experience that too. Not to say that they don't need ideas or support from us now and again, but just refocusing by asking them these questions. It's really powerful and really encouraging. They can manage more than we or maybe they think they can.
I believe that too. I also think that keeping the challenge in proportion to its actual importance, that really helps kids to manage the stress level. Years ago, when I was teaching preschool, somebody suggested the book How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk by Faber and Maslish. And it was incredibly insightful and helpful in all of my relationships. Active reflective listening is often the most valuable thing we can do as parents and learning coaches. I don't say it's also not helpful to treat their challenges as our own or get emotionally involved when they are frustrated or upset. Staying more solution oriented and emotionally neutral will help them get to a place of emotional regulation when they're frustrated far more quickly than getting upset alongside them. I would also say it's super important for parents who are supporting online learners to find things to do each day that reconnect you outside of school. If it's playing games, going for a walk, making dinner together, just not talking about school and having time to connect with them is really important in keeping that relationship strong.
Absolutely. You speak so fluently to that separation of emotion too, which now that I'm a parent, I found difficult in those first years to not get upset when my daughter was getting upset too, or not feel that with her and say, okay, this is your thing that you're dealing with, and I am not. I will support you in it, but don't have to rev up with them kind of thing. And I think that's really wise. And also your idea about connecting in another way, something that's outside of schoolwork or your obligations of the day, just things that your child enjoys doing and you enjoy. That is really tremendous advice. I have one more question for you, Hazel. We've heard a lot of remote learning and distance learning these past years. It's not generally great news. I contend that an online school is not the same as the Band-Aid of quote-unquote remote learning. I'm curious to know, what do you wish the public knew about online education and purposeful online schools?
Wow, that is a really good question. I think the public was rightly distressed at the beginning of remote learning. We know that people are best able to learn when they feel safe and secure, but going into the pandemic was traumatizing for so many people.
Yes.
Public school teachers were asked to radically pivot without the knowledge, insight, and resources online teachers had been developing for years. This was a monumental demand that teachers who taught in person, some for decades, were told to completely modify their skill set in a relatively short time and under incredible stress. Students who were used to in-person learning faced challenges as well. Did they have support at home to help them? Did they have reliable internet access? Was there enough structure and guidance that even when the teacher wasn't seen that day, the students felt supported?
Mm-hmm.
I think
So many variables.
I think there's a profound difference between remote learning and online schooling, just as there is between intention and reaction. Intention is what comes first before starting any successful venture. You have a vision, a plan, a setting of goals, and with specific objectives and purpose. Online schools are intentional. The technologies and teaching methods dovetail to fit smoothly. The features the creators of online school deemed necessary were baked into the planning right at the blueprint stage. Conversely, remote learning was a reaction to the pandemic. It was more akin to taking an existing structure of in person learning and trying to force it into a very different form, which means much less efficiency and facility. It was a huge curve for so many students and teachers. One example of this would be communication. Communication within the online school is far more streamlined. The students and parents can directly email teachers for help or guidance, and teachers offer office hours and appointments so that the communication between the school and families feels more intentional. I don't know that school districts were tech savvy enough to know what remote learning could look like simply because the majority of teachers and administrators hadn't worked in that capacity. Trying to replicate the classroom without those supplemental tools, such as adaptive technologies, platforms like Canvas, it really didn't work.
It didn't. It really didn't. It was a monumental task, and how could it work, especially at the start? There was just such this desire to replicate the classroom in a virtual setting, and you really can't do that. And so they were certainly doing the best they could with what they had, but you're right, it wasn't enough, was it?
I don't think so. I think we had a real problem with student equity, and that's kind of pushed out into some of the decisions that were being made at the state level.
Absolutely.
And one of the things I really appreciate about online schools is that their computers are really set up just for learning and kind of directs the students away from social media platforms and video games. And that helps to keep the student more focused, especially when a parent can't be present. So I think families with lower economic resources struggled to get internet access and computers so their kids could learn at home, or even having an adult present or practiced in using the technology. So I think that many families felt that they were really left to manage their children's educations on their own. I also think that remote learning also required a quick pivot to different methods of classroom management. In online school, expectations are expressed very clearly from the beginning of the school year as part of the onboarding process. And teachers are pretty quick to shut down the chat if it goes off topic or is otherwise distracting. So their understanding of the functionality of the platform is key to the online learning experience, but it can be a huge hurdle to someone whose primary work is in a physical classroom. The degree to which distractions during instruction are redirected or simply better managed cannot be overstated. There's a very strong social ethic regarding online behavior and civility put forward in online school. Conversely, brick and mortar schools were having to make it up as they went along.
They totally were. The rules are very different, and the management, like you said, coming from brick and mortar and moving online myself, it's a totally different set of skills, and teachers weren't prepared for those, and they weren't trained in them either. So I think that was really wise of you to highlight that challenge.
I think with remote learning, teachers really relied very heavily on seeing faces on the screen. And this was not exclusive to elementary school. I've heard college students complain about this. And it leads to burnout. Many families really were upset that their kids couldn't use the bathroom, or even looking away from the screen would result in comments from the teachers singling their student out. I feel like we all know kids need, first and foremost, to feel safe and secure in order to learn. But the micro focus on their faces takes away from both the instruction and the level of trust the student has with the teacher. In online school, our son is able to take a minute to use the bathroom just by checking his status box really quickly, or if he's hungry and needs to eat while he's learning, that's allowed. I think online teachers have an understanding of the more nuanced methods of assessing the student's attention, such as their participation in answering questions via the chat or different symbols on the Zoom meetings, and the actual progress the student is showing in the work they're handing in. So for me, the understanding of the technology informs the online teacher how to gauge students' level of attention in ways which don't rely solely on physical presence. That's something I don't think conventional teachers working remotely had time to grow into. And I'm hoping that more of them are offered these sorts of courses and experiences as part of their professional development.
That would be wonderful. I would love to see that happen because I feel like the online world of education is seeping more and more into the brick and mortar world. And maybe it's an inevitable thing that it'll just be part of everyone's jobs. I don't know. We talked a lot last year about the whole camera on debate, and sometimes it still comes up. I really appreciate your understanding of how many tools an online educator has to measure engagement. Last season, I talked with Christopher Youngren, who was a brick and mortar teacher turned remote teacher. And he had great advice for educators, too, about that. He echoes a lot of your sentiments, as does Jody Miller, who was featured this season in episode 1. Anything else you would want the public to know about online schools?
Well, I think besides access and personal support, the quality of assignments is of equal consequence. When you're creating assignments at each grade level, knowing what the target student is capable of and what's within their grasp online is of vital importance in both in-person and online settings. You ask yourself, can I present the subject in a way the student can understand and access it? Or can the student access the resources necessary to complete the assignment? How do we promote thoughtful discussions in ways which allow all students to contribute? How can we provide opportunities for the overlapping of different disciplines so the student's experience is richer instead of teaching some materials as separate subjects and just killing time to make it through a 6-hour day? Our son loves that he isn't glued to his Chromebook for hours on end. And I think the breaks between classes throughout the day provide time for rest or exercise, a chance to let their eyes rest from screens. There are neurological studies that have shown the value of breaks during learning times to let the information sink in. Scientific America has a great article about the positive effects of breaks, meditation, and walks in nature, and how that can have positive impacts on productivity, learning, memory, and creativity, all of which are critical aspects of our students' development. I don't know what degree remote learning followed practices modeled by online schools, but I did hear from peer parents how disappointed many of them were as to the content of some classes. It really can't be an apples to apples comparison either, which is what we want to make clear. Online schools and remote learning are entirely different creatures.
Absolutely.
I think, too, the online students had been more or less conditioned to manage the experience and the technology, while remote learning was an enormous adjustment. I think it's really important to acknowledge this. Many students do need more support from their teachers and families when they first go into online learning because they're retraining their brains to take in lessons and information in a different way. But then they gain facility, usually starting with the first week of onboarding and gradual introduction of the tools and platforms introduced to students within the lessons. Online students had the advantage of being familiar with the parameters of the technology, while remote learners often did not have that cushion of time and support. With remote learning, both teachers and students were having to learn all of this during what most of us would argue is the largest collective trauma in our lifetimes. I think that's why so much of the end of the 2020 school year felt like a wash for many families. I think it needs to be stated this pandemic is a crisis, and we had a lot of kids impacted with the trauma of the pandemic, as well as suddenly being on unsteady footing in their usually predictable schools. Some students did take to remote learning, but many felt the change in modes and locations deeply. So overall, I would not say that online school is a match for every learner and their social needs. It's been a great one for us and has helped lessen our potential stress during these challenging times.
Oh, that makes me so happy to hear. And I completely agree. I don't think there's ever a one-size-fits-all solution to much of anything in life, and that goes with education as well. Online schools can be great for some kids, but not everyone. And that's really something that we can't overstate enough, I think. Hazel, it's been awesome talking to you and getting your perspective and hearing your wisdom. We'll have links in the show notes to the articles and books that you've mentioned so that others can take a look at those as well. But if listeners want to get in touch with you, how could they do that?
Well, my email is at skyteahouse@yahoo.com. And if you have any questions about things that I've talked about or want to have a further discussion with me. And you can also find my writing at the Sky Tea House in the Cat Garden, and that's at skyteahouse.blogspot.com.
I so look forward to checking out that blog and reading your words of wisdom and insight. Thanks again for being here today, Hazel. I really appreciate your time and all your thoughts.
It was an honor to be invited, Natalie. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of SYS Presents, Adventures in Online Education. Special thanks to my guest today, Hazel Wheeler. Hazel taught us how to balance being a mom while supporting the learning of a child at home, and guided us through a deeper understanding of the nuances that separate online schools from remote teaching and learning. Next week, I will talk with UDL guru Katie Novak about all things universal design for learning. Don't miss it. If you liked what you heard today, please hit subscribe and give us a rating. On Twitter, you can follow me, Natalie Conway, at AOE Natalie, and the show at SYS Presents. If you're interested in finding out more about SYS Education, head over to syseducation.org. This podcast wouldn't be possible without our exceptional team at SYS Education, including sound engineers Natalie Farrell and Matt Duran, and producer Bo Neal. Thanks for listening, and remember, we can learn new things.
Thanks for listening.